Hi, and welcome to Girls Lunch, your mealtime companion, where we talk about food, gender, sexuality, and where everyone is welcome.
I'm Julia Andreas.
I'm Nicole Hilton.
And Nicole, the listeners need to know, are you a Dunkin' Donuts stan? Or are you all about Krispy Kreme?
Oh, it's Krispy Kreme, 100%.
Explain.
Explain? Okay, so I do have a specific story, actually. So where I grew up in Maryland, there was not like a Krispy Kreme, it's not a restaurant, store, franchise, location. There was not a Krispy Kreme place other than like you could get them in the grocery store. I was somewhere between the ages of 6 and 8, very formative years for me. And I went on a family vacation with my parents down to Florida. And they were like, oh, we have to go to this place called Krispy Kreme. And I was like, what's that, Mom and Dad? And they were like, well, do you see that light that's in the front of the store? When the light is on, that means they have just made fresh donuts. And I was like, ooh. So we specifically went when the light was on. We went through the drive-thru and got like a big old pack of donuts. And I remember like, oh my God, the smell, intoxicating, and then eating one for the first time. Incredible, amazing, show-stopping, game-changing for me.
Incredible. I've never had a Krispy Kreme donut. My family was Dunkin' all the way.
Wow.
Because like you said, there's not really any Krispy Kremes, or at least when we were growing up, they weren't really in Maryland or like the DC area. I feel like that was just not the region. Our region was more of like a Dunkin' place.
I think because Dunkin' is from Boston, and so we're still like the Northeast corridor.
Yeah, Northeast, they do love their Dunkin'. But I vividly remember, like, donuts were my favorite food as a child. Whenever I would have, like, a figure skating competition or test or anything, like, my dad would always take me to Dunkin' Donuts afterwards. And so, like, you know, very formative years of your life after a gymnastics practice or a figure skating competition that may or may not have went badly. You know, you always get at least, like, 2 donuts at the end. And I vividly remember, like, I was a donut-obsessed little child. I could eat, like, 5 in one sitting. I loved them. I remember once, like, I got up. My dad had, for some reason, gone out to Dunkin' Donuts and, like, brought, like, back a bunch of fresh donuts. I don't know why. He never did this, but he did that one day. And I walked downstairs, and he was like, Julia, like, I got donuts. Like, here, have one. And I was like, no, I don't want a donut. And he was like, what's wrong with you? What's wrong with you? And then, like, 2 hours later, I barfed. Because I had, like, the stomach flu.
Oh, my God. That seems like a dream, like a horrible dream that one would have, you know?
Yeah.
I'm not, like, saying that I doubt your memory, but that does feel like something that I would have a hallucinatory dream about.
Yeah, I mean, I think I was like 14 or something, but like my parents knew that there was something wrong if I was not eating a donut. That is how crazy I was for these bad boys. And now it's time for us to talk a little bit about these delicious round bagel-y shaped
these
treats.
Round boys with the hole in the middle.
These round boys. Exactly.
What are we going to find out what happened to the hole today?
Oh my God. Oh, Nicole, there's a whole conspiracy.
Oh, man.
There's
a whole conspiracy?
Yes. There are generations of people with feelings about this. It is a thing.
Look, I mean, it's understandable to have feelings about whole. That's what I'll say.
This sounds a little gay.
Yeah. It was meant to.
So, I don't know what you know about where donuts come from. Growing up, I thought it was just like an American thing, like hot dogs. Didn't really think about it.
The most I know, I think they come from Europe. Germany is coming to mind. I don't know if that's right or not. Switzerland? Is it Switzerland? No.
So the like working theory, we can say, is that donuts likely originated from Dutch pilgrims. Like fried dough is so common across all cultures in history. You have like fried dough showing up in the Ottoman Empire, in Greek times, Roman times, China, even like First Nations, Native Americans, they had like round acorn cakes.
Humans be frying dough.
Yeah, humans be frying dough forever. Like there's the Korean hot dog, which is like essentially a donut made out of like glutinous rice flour. Delicious. Love that bad boy.
You and I have had many conversations about like what is the donut of each culture.
Yeah.
Or that basically every culture has a donut.
Every culture has fried sweet dough, essentially. But when we're talking about like the modern donut, like the Homer Simpson donut, generally people think that it comes from Dutch pilgrims, like I said. So if we're going to zoom in on like fried dough in particular, like the Dutch oliekoek, which is known as translated to like oil cake, is commonly considered the basis for today's donuts. It came to America with the 17th century Dutch immigrants. In 1969, there's a recipe for... I'm so sorry for all of the pronunciations. I'm not Dutch. I don't know how to speak Dutch.
I think you're doing great. Although I do think it says 1669 in the notes. And that seems like an important 300 years.
But a recipe for what was called oliekoeken was possibly the earliest. Again, this is like 1669. And unlike the modern donut, like these donuts were usually twisted. I think you can see that kind of donut still today, but I think under a different name. And they often contained nuts or even like dried fruit. And this wasn't just like a everyday food. It was very much like a Christmas time or a special occasion time food.
Like a pastry.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess donuts is pastries, but yeah.
It do be pastry. But it's like, you know, like a birthday cake or like even like a fruit cake. It's like, you know, seasonal, special occasion, fun time treat. And then when these immigrants came to the New World, they replaced their frying oil with lard because it was way more available here because, you know, America loves their meats and their meat fats. And that created like a more tender and less greasy crust, apparently. And so one of the earliest recipes for like a donut shows up in 1803 in The Frugal Housewife.
Oh.
That's like one of the first times where it's like, this is a donut. Like, this is what we would consider today, like a donut.
Yeah. It's him. We know him.
It's him.
I love that, like, previous or, like, original donuts had, I think you said dried fruit, but that just makes me think of, like, fruit filling or, like, jelly-filled donuts.
Yeah, that's a good point. I feel like fruit and donuts kind of has, like, they go hand in hand all throughout the donut lifespan.
That's true with a lot of pastries, you know, like you have your tarts and your Danishes.
Danishes?
Is it
Scones?
Danish has scones? Okay. I think Danish is the thing I'm thinking of.
They got dried fruit, not fried fruit. That's something different.
That's the county fair.
That's the county fair. And fried peaches. And so in like the early 1800s, donuts were becoming more popular, but they were still pretty much considered distinctly like Dutch cuisine. And Washington Irving actually is credited by some people with popularizing the donut into like mainstream.
Oh, him?
Oh yeah, that guy. And not just like purely Dutch households. And so in his History of New York, he actually has like a whole passage. I'm just going to take out a snippet because that boy, he be lengthy.
Old-timey people, I mean, maybe all of the like pearl clutchers in the 80s and 90s were right that like TV has destroyed our attention spans, but like boy did people in 1800s and prior would really just go on and on.
They had nothing else to do.
They had nothing else to do.
They were very much like my husband, who could just write forever but not say anything.
Yeah.
He knows this about himself. And so Nicole, if you could please read the excerpt highlighted in green, in which Washington Irving describes a dinner party in New York.
Okay. Sometimes the table was graced with immense apple pies, or saucers full of preserved peaches and pears, but it was always sure to boast an enormous dish of balls of sweetened dough, fried in hog's fat and called doughnuts, or oliekoeks, a delicious kind of cake, at present scarce known in this city except in genuine Dutch families. I love that apple pies has a little hyphen. The old-timey people also would just, like, put hyphens in random places and, like, make things one word or two words, and it's, like, so much less standardized of, like, however you're feeling. Like, I feel like apple pies should have a hyphen.
Yeah, or, like, capitalize random words just because.
Oh, yeah.
Like, donuts needs to be capitalized. Or like, apple? Gotta capitalize it. With this snippet, you can really see how, donuts were considered a Dutch cuisine, and not necessarily like mainstream in the city. But we also kind of have to consider that History of New York is like a parody of life in New York at the time. But I think we can probably assume that there is like truth in here. Otherwise, it would not be sort of like exaggerated the way it is.
I want to know if there's a history of New York that's been like updated. I have no idea about what this book is about at all, other than hearing that there is like a book that is supposed to be like a parody of New York life. Wait, I'm realizing it's just Seinfeld. That's just Seinfeld. I was like, someone needs to update this for the modern times. And I'm like, wait, Jerry Seinfeld did that.
He already did that. The Washington Irving of like the 80s and 90s.
Yep.
But as we will get into, Olie Cokes are not donuts. And old-timey people clearly had plenty of feelings about this. Like, during the 1800s, different regions sort of developed different types of donuts, and they called them by different names. You have the Olie Cokes, you have the Olie Koos, you have crullers, you have donuts with a space. There were regional varieties, and they were all influenced by the people who lived in those areas. And so the kind of donut that we get today is heavily influenced by the big melting pot of cultures at the time.
Are we gonna get into the donut versus donut, like with the UGH versus just spelling it as DONUT?
Oh yeah, I mean I can tell you that snippet now. Hot gossip. I don't think I could probably like confirm this, but what I was researching and found out is that donut DOUGHNUT, that spelling is like tissue. And donut, DONUT, is like Kleenex.
Oh.
So Dunkin' Donuts, when they rolled up with their donut brand, was like, this is our donut. This is the way we spell donut. And even now, in Dunkin' Donut marketing, it's always spelled DONUT. And other brands, like other donut shops, have hopped on to that and also call like donuts. But from what I can tell, the first sort of like organization to really do it was Dunkin' Donuts.
Which is so funny to me because not that, like, I don't know, within the last 5 or 10 years, I remember Dunkin' had this big campaign where they were like, we're changing all of our stores to just say Dunkin' now because we are more than just donuts. Because I think they were trying to specifically push their coffee and they want everyone to just call them Dunkin'. So I'm like, you are shunning your own history. You don't know anything about... Do you even know where that came from? You have no idea.
You don't know what your ancestors have gone through to get here.
You're pissing on the grave of Mr. Duncan himself. I don't know if he was a real person or not.
I mean, Duncan is not a real person. I mean, the guy who invented Dunkin' Donuts obviously was, but his name was not Duncan. I don't remember his name, but it wasn't Duncan.
Oh, okay. It'd be really funny if it was Duncan spelled like the way a man's name is spelled, like Duncan.
That would be funny.
We're doing a lot of spelling in this episode, and I have to say, it's really testing me.
When I was spelling out donuts earlier, I was looking at, like, my notes, because I was like, I don't trust myself.
So smart. Big brain.
Actually, that you brought up the point, and this is still, like, on this Dunkin' Donuts tangent, that, like, Dunkin' was trying to focus on its coffee. I think also trying to focus on, like, its breakfast sandwiches and things like that. But Dunkin'... incorporating like the coffee and marketing, like having good coffee, was how in like the later half of the 20th century, that was their marketing move, to be like, we're more than just donuts. We're donuts and good coffee, or a donuts and breakfast. Because we'll get into this later, but like donuts had a pretty big plateau on the advent of like, low carb diets.
Oh yeah.
Dunkin's like, we don't only do donuts, please. We do other things.
At some point, also, like, I feel like donut becomes, in the way that sort of, like, candy bar has, like, it becomes sort of synonymous with, like, junk food,
Oh, yeah.
And is therefore targeted as, like, don't eat it. Like, I imagine that's probably one reason, or maybe even, like, a contributing factor for that, like, connotation is actually Homer Simpson. I don't know if it's sort of a chicken and egg thing, I feel like. I don't know which one actually came first, but I do feel like having Homer Simpson's favorite food be donuts is like shorthand for like, yeah, look at this like fat, unhealthy, gross man that we should not be looking up to type of thing.
Oh, yeah. And we'll get into this because that's a huge part of the Let's Get Wiggy With It section.
Okay, sorry, I'm jumping way ahead.
Yeah.
I just have
You're
questions.
being too smart.
Okay.
You're being too
Sorry.
smart for this podcast. But let's jump back to the early 1900s in which people had feelings about donuts. So much so that they were writing letters to the New York Times about it. And so, Nicole, I want you to read, and I've teased this before because I had to have you find the original document.
Oh, yeah.
I need you to read The Superior Donut, an opinion letter to the New York Times by Grandma.
Yeah, I remember when you told me, like, do you still have access to the university library? And I was like, oh, yeah, buddy. I actually found this through the public library, so shout out to your local public library. But anyway, I was like, who's the author? And Julia was like, it's Grandma.
It's just
and
Grandma.
I was like, no, what? Huh? And then I found it, and it is, in fact, signed just by Grandma.
It's just Grandma.
Okay. So this is The Superior Donut by Grandma, letter to the New York Times, published on December 15, 1913. Next to militant suffragettes, nothing so convinces me of the degeneracy of our times as the groping ignorance of your correspondents who write about donuts and crullers. New York used to be proud of Dutch ancestry and customs. The old Knickerbockers must rest uneasy in their graves to feel that their descendants have forgotten Old Koos, the predecessors of our donuts. This is literally like our society is in decline. Like, ain't what it used to be, like rolling in their graves.
You don't even know what a donut is. Like, how dare you?
Yeah. Yeah. The groping ignorance.
I know. But yeah, Grandma goes on to explain the difference between donuts and crullers, and from what it sounds like, crullers are made with chemical leavening. And so I think today they'd be considered more like cake donuts, but donuts are superior, in Grandma's opinion, because they are made with yeast and take longer to make. And so, you know, like all old folk people do, you can't take shortcuts because then you're
it's the degeneracy of society.
It is the degeneracy of the times, right next to those militant suffragettes. Like, what has society become?
Those damn women that want to vote. What the hell is wrong with them?
They want to vote, and they don't know how to make a proper donut. Like, our society is crumbling around us.
This is the most, like, old man yells at cloud article I may have ever seen, which is another Simpsons reference. I've been watching a lot of The Simpsons lately, which, if you don't know, it's just like there's like a clipping from the newspaper that is just Grandpa Simpson like shaking his fist at the sky, and it just says like top story, old man yells at cloud. And I think that's very much what this is.
It really is. I just love how, like, you know, people don't change.
Old people have always been saying, what's wrong with the kids today?
Kids these days making their crullers with chemical leavening. A shame.
Oh, yeah. So chemical leavening, I just want to clarify, that's like baking soda or baking powder, right?
Yes. Or a predecessor to baking chemicals like soda and baking powder. People used to use pearl ash. We don't really use that anymore, obviously. It probably wasn't good for us. But who's to say?
No, what, doctors? You listen to what doctors tell you?
This is the 1800s.
I don't think so.
I would not get near a doctor.
That's so true.
But as Grandma wrote in 1913, this is, you know, right around time for World War I. And boy, them soldiers, they loved snacking on donuts on the front lines, but we're going to skip right over that for now. And we're going to get to something more important, which is how the hole got in the donut.
Oh my God.
But I want to talk about the donut hole conspiracy, because that is what I've been reading about for a long time, and it's kind of buck wild. I don't know. Have you ever heard of any, like, stories or, like, myths about how the donut got its hole?
The only thing that I can think of that is, like, in any way related is, like, donut holes are just, or, like, because, like, a donut hole is, like, the treat that you get that's just, like, a little ball, right?
Mm-hmm.
that like I think something about like the donut has a hole in the middle for like air so that it puffs up correctly. This could all be completely made up. I have no idea. And so bakers decided like, well, I don't want to throw away this little bit of dough, so I'll just make it its own thing. And that's why we have donut holes. I have no idea.
All right. Well, would you please read the excerpt of the Old Salt donut hole inventor telling how his discovery was made to the Washington Post, March 26, 1916.
Yes. Local favorite, the Washington Post, our hometown newspaper. Well, sir, they used to fry all right around the edges, but when you had the edges done, the insides was all raw dough. And the twisters used to sop up all the grease just where they bent, and they were tough on the digestion. Well, I says to myself, why wouldn't a space inside solve the difficulty? I thought at first I'd take one of the strips and roll it around. Then I got an inspiration, a great inspiration. I took the cover off the ship's tin pepper box and I cut into the middle of that donut the first hole ever seen by mortal eyes. Well, sir, them donuts was the finest I ever tasted. No more indigestion, no more greasy sinkers, but just well done, fried through donuts. I think this is like maybe like what I half remembered in the rambling mess that I just told you.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that was Captain Hanson Gregory, who was a Maine sailor and who was probably full of baloney.
And donuts.
This guy was nominated for the Hall of Fame and was commemorated with a bronze tablet, quote, honor donut creator, end quote, in like the 40s. But he's told different versions, and different versions of this story have gotten around. So some say it was his mom who invented the donut hole because she used to put nuts in the middle to like fix having like a mushy dough in the center. Mm-hmm. And then she took it all out together and like created the donut hole. And others still say that the old Cap invented the donut hole when he was stuck in a terrible storm and he still wanted to eat some donuts, like same, I would too. Right. And so he just plopped the donut onto the steering wheel so he could just, munch and steer at the same time.
Oh.
But there's actually a painting called Still Life with Sweets and Pottery from 1627 by Juan van der Haman et Leon that depicts what looks like to be modern donuts. And there's a little link I have right there.
Can I click it? I want to look at it.
Yeah. I promise it's not fishing.
It's not a Rickroll?
It might be.
Oh, no. Oh, the song's so catchy. Oh, you got me. No. This do look suspiciously like modern donuts. But how do we know that this painting really happened in the 1600s and wasn't like placed here by aliens or something?
It was AI, actually.
Oh my God. ChatGPT. You're right. There's figs in here too, which is kind of cool. Right? Those are figs?
Yeah, it's actually a really nice painting.
Yeah.
It's in the National Gallery of Art in D.C.
Other local
I'm
favorite.
like, I probably looked at this painting like 100 times.
Yeah.
I just never knew.
Probably so.
Max Miller of Tasting History also found a painting of a little girl holding a pug. It's adorable. And also a donut that was probably from around the late 1700s. But for the life of me, I cannot find the same painting. But if you watch his video on donuts, he pops it up. He never names it. And so I'm just like, where is this?
Suspicious.
And so, like, it's very likely that the shape that donuts come in has existed, on and off throughout time, but we never really had a distinct name for it, nor was it like a distinct thing within itself. Kind of on that, donuts, the name, dough plus nuts,
right,
people think was because there used to be nuts in the dough, which is kind of like a misnomer. The ending of nut and you...
Are you really laughing at the word nut? What are you, 12?
I am. But the ending of nut was actually like pretty common back in the 1800s. You had spice nuts, you had ginger nuts, and it generally just like referred to a small cookie or cake. And so donuts was just like, a small cookie or cake made out of fried dough. And not because there were necessarily nuts within.
So then what are D's nuts made of?
Diesel.
Oh, okay. I always wondered about that one. Case closed.
Yeah, it's They're incredibly expensive to maintain. So we'll probably never know the truth of like how a donut got its shape, but it's also like, you know, it's probably been around forever. We probably just didn't have a name for it. Here it is today, and we've put the donut in a very specific donut box. But who knows, like maybe 100 years from now we'll be like, oh no, is this a donut? We'll see.
The only way we can know is this a donut is we need Rhett and Link to do a Will It Donut episode.
That is true.
Scientifically.
Yeah. And so moving on to our next chapter, back to World War One. It just ended. World War One just ended.
And we did it! We won!
We did it! Yay!
Woo!
And people are having like a grand old time. They're loving their cup of joe. They're loving their nice cruller in the morning. And there is like definitely donut hype going on right now because soldiers are bringing back this love of donuts. And we'll get into why they love donuts later. Donuts are popular right now. It'd really be like the perfect chance to throw some capitalism into the mix. Introducing Adolf Levitt, who was a Bulgarian immigrant who migrated to the Americas in the 1890s. And he saw like how popular donuts were after World War One, and like a proper American businessman, he wanted to capitalize on donuts. And so he had his own donut shops, but he also created a automatic donut making machine and very specific flour and mixes to go in that machine. And so Adolf Levitt, standardized donut making. Before him, most donuts were made at home by like someone's mom, someone's grandma, someone's like servant, maid, whatever. But come like the 1920s, Adolf saw the chance to sort of capitalize on the standardization of donuts. And he kind of took that from like Henry Ford's assembly line.
Oh, yeah.
And he was like, I'm going to apply this to donut making. And so this man was like, I'm going to found the Donut Corporation of America.
Oh.
Which is the commercial promoter for donuts. It is Big Donut.
Big Donut.
He's going to make National Donut Month. He's going to create the Dunking Association. He's going to have stars be like brand ambassadors.
Oh.
They're going to eat his fancy donuts. They're going to love his donut machines.
He's like having paid sponsors with like influencers. Like paid sponsorships.
Oh yeah, 100%. And so, like, Levitt gaslit girl boss his way through the Great Depression. Like, when his stores were closing down, he was like, well, I have all the mixes, I have all the machines. And that is how I'm going to keep making money, because having a standardized machine and a standardized mix means that you need less skilled laborers, which makes it cheaper.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of how we started getting, like, mass-produced donuts. Like, they left the home sphere and they entered the commercial sphere during the 1920s.
Wow.
And the 1920s was really like the growth of the fast food industry, like the start of it, because of this standardization that was happening like all around. And the American consumer landscape is starting to change. You know, like people have more income, they've got more leisure time.
The growth of the middle class.
Yeah. Shopping culture, Great Gatsby's happening, there's shirts flying everywhere, some guy's having an affair, then he gets hit by a car.
Some guy's always having an affair, man.
It's true. And so, you know, this was like a great chance for donuts to become mass-produced. And this kind of gets into like why people don't like donuts now, because they're kind of like a symbol of mass production and gluttony.
Interesting. Gluttony for sure.
Mm-hmm. And so fast forward a little bit to post-World War II, you know, America's finally affluent enough to make the consumer culture dreams of like the 1920s come to life. We have the classic, quote, American dream, end quote, where people get like houses, suburbs are starting to appear. And with the rise of suburbia, you have the rise of automobiles. And so these cars are like the glue holding together communities. And now we have a new way to market donuts to consumers. They're no longer just a tasty little treat. They are an on-the-go food.
Oh. Yeah. I do also know at some point, I'm sure I'll do an episode about it. I'll figure out a way to make it like Wig Sex related. But I know a lot about the history of fast food. Definitely like the rise of the deep fried and golden brown age of the fast food industry definitely happens in like the post-war boom. Because as you said, there's just generally like more disposable income. People like eat out more often, generally, because people are on the go.
On the go.
We are, and still remain here in the U.S., like a car-centric country. Like walkable cities, never heard of her, don't know her. Yeah, so that makes sense that would also happen in like the same era that you're talking about for donuts.
Yeah, and this was part of like Dunkin's marketing as well, because people were stopping at donut shops on their way to work or on their way back from work, because they're open really early and really late, and so you can get your breakfast of a donut and a cup of coffee before you gotta go work on them skyscrapers or whatever you were up to in the 50s. I don't know. I wasn't born then. You're
a marketing advertisement executive that sexually harasses all the women in the office that have the misfortune of working there.
Yeah, it's a great time.
Woo!
Woo! So in the 50s, people really took advantage of this commuter culture, especially Big Donut. And so there was a whole process of examining traffic flow, parking, visibility, and strategically placing donut shops in like the midst of these commuter routes so that, they could get income of customers. And this was just like the norm for assessing donut franchise locations. Like this is what established where a donut shop is going to be. And the 50s is also when a whole bunch of donut chains emerged, like Dunkin' Donuts and Krispy Kreme. You've got like Spud Nuts on the West Coast. You've got Tim Hortons in Canada. I think Tim Hortons actually came a little bit later.
Timmy's.
You have Duck Donuts in North Carolina, which is a pretty regionally specific one, but still beloved today.
I was going to say, I've had Duck Donuts, but then again, I have been to North Carolina several times, so.
And yeah, like chains became the main way that donuts were marketed and sold because they were so easy to make and super cheap to make. And you didn't need like skilled laborers because Big Donut was like, here, standardized processes. And so, like post World War II to the 60s, like donuts were just like blowing off the shelves into people's mouths. It was a great time.
Just rolling right off that conveyor belt. You see it, the Krispy Kreme that like as they're being like glazed, just goes right off that conveyor belt and it just pops right into your mouth.
That sounds like a dream. I would love that actually.
That's my dream.
That's my dream too. And then the 60s through 80s growth wavered and slowed, mostly because like donuts were no longer trendy food. They were just kind of like a mainstay. You'd have your local donut shop, whether that's a Krispy Kreme or a Dunkin' Donuts or a Tim Hortons if you're in Canada. And my God, Canadians have a lot of feelings about Tim Hortons. Like this would have to be a whole separate bonus episode, but like no joke, Canadians feel like they eat more donuts than Americans do.
Wow.
They feel like they are the donut country.
Just because of Timmy's?
Just because of Timmy's. They're
Wow.
like, no, we are the donut place.
Wow.
And they hate Krispy Kreme.
Oh, no. I have never had Tim Hortons because I mean, you can get them some places in the U.S. if you go like far enough north. Like I think there's some Tim Hortons in like Michigan area, somewhere around there, but I've never been that far. I've never been to Canada. I so badly want to try. I don't actually feel qualified to call it Timmy's because I've never eaten it. But I think my qualification is that I watch a lot of hockey. And Tim Horton, if you did not know, was a hockey player.
He was, in fact, a hockey player. But just to, like, kind of give you the amount of hate that Canadians have towards Krispy Kreme, August 2000, a Canadian business called Krispy Kreme's arrival in Canada, the beginning of a, quote, holy war, end quote. Called Canada the promised land of donuts and claimed that Canadians eat more donuts than Americans.
Dang. Shots fired.
They also said it was like an assault on Canadian national identity to have a Krispy Kreme in the land of Tim Hortons.
Oh my God.
And a Canadian Idol judge ridiculed Krispy Kreme's bright red light and said that Krispy Kreme is the prostitute, the hooker of donuts.
No! Don't you do her dirty like that. What'd she do to you?
Like, they have strong... Like, it would have to be, like, a whole other bonus episode. Like,
Yeah.
The feelings that Canadians have on donuts is so intense.
Canadians, please tweet at Girls Lunch and tell us why you hate Krispy Kreme so much or why you love Timmy's so much. I need clarity on this issue.
I would love to know.
We need to know.
And so, yeah, 60s and through 80s, like, donut growth wavered and slowed, plateaued, you know. Donuts were just like, yeah, everyday man kind of thing. And I'd say, like, actually now, donut popularity is picking back up again. We've had so many trends around dessert foods. We've had the frozen yogurt. We've had cupcakes. We've had, like, almost every other specific dessert food under the sun. And so I think, like, donuts are kind of starting to rise to the trendiness. You've got things like Voodoo Donuts, and you have Sugar Shack, which is a purely vegan donut chain, which I don't know if they're still going on. I think like a lot of them closed during the pandemic, but that's where I used to go to get my donut fix in Northern Virginia. And while I mourn the loss of my tasty vegan donuts, Nicole, would you like to tell us the food fact of the day?
I would. Let's go get that food fact of the day, Julia.
Let's go.
Our food fact of the day has nothing to do with donuts as far as I can tell. I will say that there is a trigger warning for cheese.
Oh, God.
This is going to be about cheese.
No.
So I stumbled across this in some research that I'm doing for what is certainly going to be a podcast episode and maybe another project of mine to be determined. As I was working on this research project, part of that project involves reading a lot of menus, like a lot of menus. I've probably read like, I don't know, like dozens, probably approaching 100 menus at this point.
Wowzers.
Yeah, I don't say that as like a brag. I say that more as like, what's wrong with me? I am, in fact, insane.
As a cry for help.
As a cry for help. My document is, in fact, this will give you a small preview, but the document that I have where I'm compiling all this data is called Fred Harvey Menu Spreadsheet because I'm insane. So look forward to that future episode. But so cheese. So as I was reading all these menus, I was taking particular note of like, you know, what's being served, when, that type of thing. And I kept noticing that in the like dessert column, that cheese was listed. And I was like, that seems so bizarre. Like you'd have like, you know, ice cream, slice of pie. And then it would usually say like the type of cheese. So you would have whatever type of cheese. I'm suddenly cannot think of a type of cheese to save my life.
Cheddar? Gruyere?
Yes, cheddar cheese.
Brie?
Yeah, actually Gruyere was...
Camembert?
Yeah, thank you. Okay, there's no need for you to flex on me that hard.
I don't even eat cheese.
I know. Gruyere and cheese... Jesus. Gruyere and cheddar. Gruyere and cheddar were often like listed in like with these desserts. So I was just like, what is this? I don't understand what this is. So if you think about, you know, American culture and our food culture, Julia, if I were to tell you like we're having cheese, when in the sort of course of a meal would you expect that to be?
Oh, definitely like hors d'oeuvres
Yeah.
or appetizers. Like you have like your charcuterie board of cheese and meats and grapes and things like before you actually have a meal.
Right. Yeah. So that's where, you know, in contemporary America, oftentimes, like if you're having cheese, it is usually as like not an appetizer, but like an appetite stimulant. Aperitif seems a little strong, but yeah. So think of your charcuterie boards or your cheese and crackers platter, which is always big at my house. So we usually think of cheese and crackers as being like a before meal type of thing. But apparently, during the Depression, cheese and crackers were often eaten in place of dessert as like a way to save money. And when you get into like World War II, you have shortages of a lot of things that you would usually use to make dessert, right? Like butter or sugar also. So as a result of that, people would often eat cheese as like a way to kind of round out the meal of like, okay, we've eaten dinner, but now we need like something afterward, but we don't have any butter or sugar to make like cake or pie. This was such the style at this time that it has been reported that FDR and Eleanor Roosevelt used to have cheese and crackers for dessert. I don't know if it was necessarily as like a patriotic thing, like to finish off their meal instead of having dessert, they would have like cheese and crackers. I think it was like an avocado with some French dressing, which was, I was like, interesting. Whoa. Interesting.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
And the cheese and crackers actually make sense as to why they probably weren't rationed, because they would last a long time. Like, would last a lot longer than fresh bread or fresh milk.
Yeah. And the American dairy industry is also huge.
Big dairy.
Big dairy is
Big
so
cheese.
real. It's so real. So in doing more research, so that's just in the US, but I also found out that this cheese course is pretty common in many European countries, specifically in like France and Italy. It's usually happens like in between dinner and dessert, or as we were just talking about, happens in place of dessert. In France, if you're wondering, this is like where the cheese course comes from. It usually happens in between dinner and dessert. So if you would like to serve your own cheese course, maybe not you, Julia, specifically.
Never.
If you would like to serve it for guests, I found an article from NPR that says, quote, "The classic French cheese course usually offers a minimum of 3 cheeses, each representing a different type of milk. So you'd have cow, goat, or sheep's milk, or a different family of cheese, fresh, soft, blue, pressed, etc. And they recommend placing cheeses in order of mildest to strongest. So you start with something more mild, and then you eventually move to like, you know, I guess your strong, stinky cheeses.
Yeah, save that blue cheese for last.
Yeah. If you're serving a cheese course, you might pair cheese, you know, if you think of a charcuterie board, you might have some sweet elements to offset that like saltiness with things like candied nuts or jams, preserves, dried fruit. But if you are a purist or if you are French, they say that the cheese should sort of speak for itself, and you should only have it with like, you know, a piece of like fresh bread, which does sound tasty, but it is interesting to think of having that like at the end of your meal or instead of dessert.
Yeah.
Especially as someone like me who loves her dessert foods.
I gotta have a sweet treat at the end of the day.
And so that's our food fact of the day, is if you've been, you know, folks out there who can eat dairy, and like Julia and I, this is the permission that you've been looking for to have cheese for dessert.
Yeah, man.
Go
out there.
We give it to you.
Get a bunch of nice cheese, just sit on your couch and just go at it. Have a good time.
It's what the French would want.
It is what the French would want. And Nicole, you and I, we do love a sweet treat at the end of the day. You know who else loved sweet treats during the day?
Ronald Reagan, because I think he was the president that ate a lot of jelly beans.
That I didn't know that about him, actually. I was going to say World War I soldiers.
Oh, those guys.
So let's learn about Doughnut Lassies, and let's get wiggy with it.
Yeah, let's get wiggy with it.
So yeah, I actually want to backpedal a little bit and return back to World War I and talk about the Doughnut Lassies of the Salvation Army. There's a story that goes that in 1917, 4 of the women in the Salvation Army, they were sent to the trenches, eastern France, to help the soldiers and to do essentially what the Salvation Army does at the time, which was provide religious services, bake treats, play music apparently. And as they were like, you know, peddling around camp, they decided to make donuts with the scrap ingredients and materials that they had lying around. And so the story goes that they actually filled a soldier's helmet with lard to fry donuts.
Huh. Very sweaty donuts, I imagine.
I don't know what the aftertaste was like. Probably a little bit of man sweat.
Yeah.
But, the soldiers seemed to love them. And, like, this became such a phenomenon that the Ladies' Home Journal had a whole page spread about it. And I will send you the picture.
There we go. Pies and donuts in the trenches. Over there. Ah, yes.
Yep.
That phrase.
A touch of home the Salvation Army gives our boys, quote, over there, unquote. They do that a lot in this.
Yeah.
But I'm actually going to have you read a snippet, and it is underneath the image in green.
Sorry, I'm distracted by this lady who's just wearing a gas mask, just very casually.
Oh, we'll get to her. We'll get to her in a second.
Okay. Should I put on an old-timey voice? These women,
yes,
skilled
please.
and experienced. Let me do my best. These women, skilled and experienced in practical relief work and long since consecrated to God and his service, are the little mothers of the battlefield, whom you read about as cooking, mending, singing, praying, reading, writing, serving hot coffee to sentinels in the dead of the night, and doing what you mothers of fighters would do for your boys if you were over there.
Incredible.
It's my best 1920s newsreel voice.
So, like the article kind of talks about, there are these women of various ages who were sent over to the front lines, the trenches of World War I in eastern France, to kind of be like dorm moms to a bunch of soldiers. And there were about like 250 volunteers. So it wasn't that many, but as like, you know, soldiers reported, it made like a huge impact on the soldiers' psyche. One guy even reported in the Boston Daily Globe, "Can you imagine hot donuts and pie and all that sort of stuff served by might good-looking girls too?" And so these women were over here literally on front lines, like mothering these soldiers and
God.
making sure that they had a little bit of taste of home, like their mothers or their wives would do for them if they were over there.
Oh my God. There's so much to unpack here.
I know.
Ugh. I could see, I mean, I guess that would be nice for anybody if you're in such a high stress situation to like have some nice ladies around who serve you donuts and pie. But it's also an active war zone.
Yes.
Which is kind of the crazy part to me.
Yes, like it sounds super homey and nostalgic, but like these women were literally in the trenches with these soldiers. Like there's a story reported by a 20-year-old woman named Stella Young. She eventually kind of became like the face of the Doughnut Lassies. But she was recounting her time near like the Met's front, and like firing was so intense that Salvation Army supplies couldn't reach them. And so she's in her tent, she's making donuts, and at one point a piece of shrapnel rips through her tent and tore through a donut pan that she was standing right in front of, and she had just stepped away from the stove for another ingredient when shrapnel literally hit her pan.
Holy shit.
Like, yeah, these women were in the war, and I feel like that's usually so glossed over because they're supposed to be like these angels of the home, these angels of the battlefield, these like pseudo mothers, but like I don't know if anyone ever talks about the PTSD that these women probably went through dealing with these injured soldiers and being in active combat fields.
And they probably, like, since they probably weren't actually like enlisted in the military, I doubt they got any kind of like, not to say actually soldiers get like not very great benefits when they get discharged, from what I understand, is like a lot of times veterans just sort of get discharged and the US government's like, yeah, thanks. Okay, bye.
Okay, bye.
What do you mean you have terrible trauma or you've been horrifically injured? That's not our fault. What? But anyway, like, since they were basically just civilian volunteers, even though they were exposed to a lot of the same, like, horrific shit, they probably didn't even get, like, a lot of the benefits of, like, being in the military. They don't get any kind of pension or...
Yeah. And so, like you mentioned, the woman in the gas mask, I'm going to bring our attention back to her.
I have to know about her.
The little blurb underneath her says, "This Salvation Army lassie is prepared for any service she may be afforded an opportunity to render to one of our boys at the front, no matter how exalted or how lowly." Like, she's in a literal gas mask. The blurb under her is like, oh, look at her. She's, like, ready to help. She's in her little gas mask. She's going to do, like, whatever she can for your boys. And it's just, like, this woman's in a literal gas mask.
Haha, hope she isn't, like, horrifically scarred or poisoned. LOL. She's so cute.
Yeah, and I could not find out if any of the volunteers died during their time on the trenches. I'm not sure. But I know this sort of role was replicated in World War II with Doughnut Dollies, which was through, I think, Red Cross, not the Salvation Army. And I do know that at least 52 women died.
Oh, God.
Doing essentially the same kind of... They didn't actually make donuts, which is why I didn't necessarily include them. But they had, like, similar roles. So, like, these women are playing the part of, like, mother and caregiver to give soldiers a sense of hope and normalcy. But they're also away from home themselves, and they're just people. You know, they're probably just as scared and just as tired and just as homesick as the soldiers were. But they can't show that.
Who takes care of the Doughnut Dollies?
Yeah.
When they are sad and need a little picking up, or are perhaps reasonably frightened out of their gourd.
Yeah. A piece of shrapnel just exploded your donut pan, and you were so close to dying because of it, but luckily you stepped away from the stove. And so, I mean, like, World War II, going back to donuts, really sort of, like, made donuts mainstream. But the women behind making them throughout all of history have been very much sidelined. And it's, like, this idea of, like, the mother, the cook, the caregiver making these donuts for their boys to give them comfort. But going back into modern times, women are not really allowed to eat donuts. Like you mentioned really early on this episode, kind of like candy bars, it's like donuts are the junk food. They're like the demonized bad for you food. And so a woman can make donuts, but they're not really allowed to eat donuts.
Because then they might get fat and therefore unattractive. And therefore, if a woman is not attractive, she has no value.
Mm-hmm. And we're going to get to a prime example of...
Oh, buddy.
Of this. But we're going to go back into like how donuts kind of became a junk food versus like a commuter-friendly food, like a breakfast burrito. And so like donuts have always been a symbol for Americanism, patriotism. It's part of like our national cuisine. And it's like, you know, kind of because of the wartime connection, kind of because they were used to be made by moms at home, and because they're commercialized, they're on-the-go foods. But like I said, today it's pretty morally taboo to eat a donut, and like this donut has become a battleground for body discipline, aka fat phobia, where it's like, oh, if you eat a donut, you are a morally bad person because you cannot control your desires. And this sort of rhetoric, surprise cameo, started with Sylvester Graham.
It's him!
It's him! Like you said in our last episode about his ideologies really influenced the time. So much so that people are writing books now, like William Alcott wrote The Young Housekeeper. And it kind of started this war on like refined sugars and like this broader critique of refined white flour and commercialization as a whole. And donuts really took the fall for a lot of that. Like there are these obesity and health concerns. The 1920s had like this different kind of body type come into fashion. But also like donuts were becoming popular at the same time. So there's a pretty interesting dichotomy. So in the 90s, body style was pretty similar to the 20s in that women were very skinny, very like thin and tall.
You have your Kate Moss, like will disappear if you turn sideways kind of skinny.
Love the like index card look.
Yeah.
This guy named William Sapphire wrote a opinion piece called Bagels versus Donuts to the New York Times in 1999, and he talks about kind of how like donuts are the sin of man. But he's especially talking about how like we have to have like people want donuts because they're comforting and they're like openly unhealthy, but like we crave them. And he starts to kind of like eroticize nostalgia. It's a little weird. So I really need you to read the snippet in green, please.
Okay. I haven't read it yet. Sounds very puritanical already.
Oh my god, yeah.
The guiltily gulped donut has held fast to its liberal essence. Despised by dieters, it remains deliciously feminine, sinfully sweet, and outrageously hedonistic. No wonder the donut, like excesses in art and hypersensitivity in sexual relations, is staging a comeback. Today's donut knows what it is and defiantly asserts its fattening identity. It says the donut is deliciously feminine. Why is the hole in the middle? Is what I would like to ask to William Sapphire. What's that hole for, bud?
What's that hole for, bud? Anyway, so yeah, he's like, donuts are sexy because we want them, but we can't have them. Because they remind us of our moms and stuff. I don't know.
Weird.
I don't know what that man was thinking about. But kind of like that eroticized nostalgia is perfectly exemplified in the Halloween costume called Christy Creams.
I saw this as I was reading the quote, and I was like, oh my god, I have to not like look at it.
I know. No, please look at it now. Please just zoom in on that blonde bombshell.
Ba ba boom.
And like the little description under like, you know, the little costume tag says, this little sweetie will serve up your goodies, hot, fresh, and cream-filled. Dressed with attached apron and tulle petticoat. Matching hat, removable Christy Creams badge, necklace, plastic cooking tools, and bakery box.
Let me try to describe this image for the people at home.
Please.
I'm gagging at the little box that she's holding that says cream-filled. We have a very conventionally attractive white woman who has like
a really strong fake tan.
Yeah, fake tan. She's got dyed blonde hair. Honestly, this costume looks like it could have been photoshopped onto her, or she may be like an AI person, if I'm being honest. Christy, I'm sorry if you are a real woman.
It's Mrs. Creams. Thank you.
Oh, no. Okay, you're right. So she's wearing this dress that's like green with white polka dots. It's like very much high above the knee. She's holding very seductively with like one finger this little pink box that says cream filled, and it's like tied on a ribbon. And then perhaps the cream on top or whatever is the sprinkles on the donut, I guess would be the metaphor here, is she's wearing a necklace that is basically just like a tiny donut on a ribbon that is almost certainly meant to draw attention to her cleavage.
Mm-hmm. And I'd say like the shape of this, like the dress itself, the costume is giving very much 50s housewife plus waitress.
Yeah. But in a slutty way. Actually, I feel like I need to say, if you want to wear a slutty Halloween costume, go for it.
Oh, yeah.
You know what? We are not the type, there's no slut shaming on this podcast. We will shame the U.S. military, but no slut shaming.
I will be Christy Cream for Halloween this year, if I can find the costume.
Awesome.
But yeah, like this perfectly kind of exemplifies what that other guy was talking about when it comes like the eroticization of nostalgia and of caregivers. And it really shows how like women and donuts are kind of linked in the way that like they are there to satisfy men's desires, whether that's physical, like hunger and cravings, or more sexual, which is also physical. And it's just like women are there to give you donuts to eat when you're hungry and to give you a good time when you want a bone. Which I don't think actually Sylvester Graham would agree with, but you know, regardless.
Not at all. He would want to know why there was a hole in the donut, I'll tell you that. He'd say that alone is too sexual.
He's like, this is impossible, you have to get this out of here.
Yeah.
But like I mentioned earlier, this kind of idea that women can provide donuts, but they cannot eat donuts. Because the idea is that you cannot eat donuts and look like Mrs. Christy Cream.
Right.
You know,
right.
The bombshell bod, if you are often eating donuts. And like if a woman eats a donut, like God forbid,
she's letting herself go.
But I found so many articles about school programs called Donuts with Dads.
Oh, did you not have those?
No.
Oh, we had those all the time when I was in elementary school, yeah.
Which were like trying to get dads more involved with their children's education by bribing them with donuts to get them to hang out with their kids.
I can tell you about my Donuts with Dads, Donuts for Dads. I'm not sure about the preposition. Experience, which it was usually in elementary school. There was like an equivalent for moms, but I don't remember what it was.
Muffins with moms?
I think it might have been muffins for moms, honestly, because of the alliteration, and it's also like a breakfast thing. Because they'd usually have it sort of in the morning, because the idea is like your parents can go and then they can go to work afterward. And I remember that like because I went to a very small, very rural elementary school, and like if it was Donuts for Dad's Day, that parking lot was full. People were parking on the side of the road, you know, people were parking down the street because they not only like wanted free donuts, but I think it was also like, as you said, an incentive to like, you know, come and see like where your kid goes to school. Like sometimes the teachers would have them talk for a couple minutes of like, what do you do for a living, Mr. Hilton? Or come and see my classroom. This is my desk. This is little Timmy, my best friend. And this is Big Timmy, his dad, who also loves donuts and has a mustache or whatever.
They all have mustaches.
Yeah, I just remember it very much was like a prototypical dad environment where like you just have a bunch of kind of middle-aged men standing around like nodding to each other. Like if you've ever seen like dads supervise a grill, you know, it's kind of like that, of like they, you know, sort of have the posture and they're like snacking on their donuts and coffee and they're like, yeah, that's a nice desk you got there, Timmy, you know?
Yeah, I mean, like while I was researching, I saw like a lot of these Donuts with Dads programs. And a lot of them seem to be very, like, directed at, like, male bonding sessions. Specifically, there was one in East St. Louis where the school wanted to connect fathers with male students and advocate for the influence of men in children's lives. Again, making, like, you know, donuts a consumption in the male sphere pretty, like, regimentedly. I don't know if that's a word, but I said it, and I'm moving on. Meanwhile, like, if you Google anything about donuts, you are inundated with articles about how you will, like, literally die if you eat a singular donut.
Oh, it's over for me, man. I have a dozen sitting in my kitchen right now.
I know. What are you going to do with all them donuts?
They're just nails in my coffin.
I'm just gonna read like a bunch of like the search result headlines because it's just ridiculous.
Oh, I'm so excited for these scare headlines.
8 reasons why you should never ever eat donuts. The 5 worst breakfast foods for you. Number 1, donut. 9 reasons why you should never eat donuts, like ever. Why donuts should be mostly a don't.
Okay, that one's good. That one I'll let pass.
Let's see. Don't dunk those donuts. Why donuts are so bad for us. 14 health foods worse than a donut, which is like, using donut as a metric as like bad food.
Wait, what are health foods that are worse for you than a donut? And I'm so curious as to how they're qualifying like worse for you or better.
I think
for
like
you.
a muffin was one of them.
Okay.
When I read that article. And like to kind of continue the dichotomy between like men eating donuts as like male bonding and then like the just panic that people get when like a donut is near a woman, I found one article called, quote, "Donuts on Our Daughters," end quote. And it's about this pediatrician mom is like freaking out about the possibility of kids wanting to eat unhealthy food because their clothes have junk food patterns on them.
Oh my God.
And this started because her daughter was wearing a shirt with donuts on it. Like her child daughter had a shirt with donuts on it. And she was like, oh my God, if kids wear junk food on their clothes, they're going to become obese.
It all just leads back to fat phobia, doesn't it?
It really does. And it's just like, okay, so like your daughter can't have a donut on her shirt, but your son can have male bonding time with their dad by eating donuts. It's crazy.
That's bizarre.
It's really wild.
I wonder if there's some like heterosexist or like homophobic fear latent in this. Like if we're associating donuts with women or like, again, if we're thinking purely like heterosexually, donuts are something that must be consumed by men because women make them. Is there some weird fear of like lesbianism or queer women in here? Like if women eat the thing that women make, and also that like queer women are inherently like threatening to men because then men are useless. I don't know. That may just be me spitballing, but I wouldn't be surprised if like that's somehow latent in this.
Oh yeah, and I mean like even though men are sort of given the go ahead to eat donuts, there's still like a lot of bad stereotypes around that. Like, cops. There's that huge stereotype of like the lazy cop with their donut or like Homer Simpson and his donut. It is like for men, I think it's like donuts can be also extremely complicated because it is something that they are allowed to eat, but at the same time, they are also villainized for eating in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
It is like, if you eat donuts, you're gonna be Homer Simpson, or you're gonna be the fat, lazy cop, or like all of these things. You are blue class, you are I was gonna say working class in blue collar, but it came out blue class.
Yeah. No, I think that still like transmits the same message mostly, so.
That's the new term. Like you are a lower class worker. You are schleppy. And so like even though men may have permission to eat donuts, it does not mean necessarily that they are free from the villainization of eating donuts.
Yeah. The donut stigma.
The donut stigma. And isn't life just about helping men get over their stigmas?
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, like some concluding thoughts about our donut discussion today. Like clearly people have so many feelings about donuts. If Grandma from 1913 was not like an example, like regionality, brand, loyalty, national identity, like people love and hate donuts at the same time. And I feel like kind of the tide is changing when it comes to donuts. They're becoming more of like a normal food and less of like a monstrous demon. Like with the advent of the keto diet and other high-fat diets, and plus like weirdly the normalization of Asian cuisine, because there's actually like a lot of fried food in Asian cuisine, specifically like Japan. They fry a lot of foods. They got a lot of katsu.
Tempura.
Fried foods are becoming less scary. Donuts are becoming less scary. And they're also becoming more like hip and cool and trendy. Like we have Voodoo Donuts, we have Sugar Shack, more local chains. We also had the super trend of having, replacing your wedding cake with like a donut tower or a donut wall.
Yes, this is so popular.
Yeah, it's still, I feel like it's been going on for like the last 5 to 7 years, but it's still popular. Yeah. And so like donuts are kind of coming back as something like cool and trendy and fun to do. Also, I think like the wellness trend, you have all these wellness influencers on Instagram or whatever. and they all promote eating everything in moderation, which is a whole other discussion on itself, because not all of these influencers are being honest about what they're eating or their eating habits. But it is kind of like this dichotomy of, look at this super fit, pretty, skinny. It's like Christy Cream again, in the sense where it's like, look at this beautiful, fit, pretty lady, but she's eating a donut.
Even she can eat a donut.
And so donuts are really, I think, coming back into like the mainstream in a new way. I'm sure that'll, stir up more feelings about donuts in general. But I know for me, if I get a donut that I can eat that doesn't have dairy in it, it's gone. It's down the gullet. It's out of here.
Yep.
Donuts are a rarity, especially living all the way in Montana.
Yeah.
And it's hard to make them when you have like an elevation of 4,000 feet.
Oof.
So if I get a donut, that's a happy day for me. I love those suckers.
As someone who is even like relatively dairy intolerant, like I probably shouldn't eat dairy, but I do anyway because Big Dairy tells me that I have to. As I said, I have a dozen donuts that are sitting in my kitchen right now, and even though it is 8 o'clock at night, I'm going to go chow down on one of those bad sprinkle boys.
Please do. Do it for me. I'm stuck out here with no donuts.
Dear listener, we encourage you to do the same. Go get yourself a donut.
Hit up your Krispy Kreme, hit up your Dunkin' Donuts, your Tim Hortons, your local chain, your Duck Donuts. I don't think they have Spud Nuts anymore, but if you can find one, go for it.
Your Fractured Prune is a Maryland chain.
I have not thought about Fractured Prune in years.
Yeah. Well, wherever you can get even if you got to go to your glass case at your grocery store and get some, go get yourself a nice frosted sprinkly boy. Maybe say dough. And thanks for lunching with us.
And
we'll see you next time.
Bye.
Our theme music is Red Onions by Louis Zong. Please check out the rest of his album Vegetable Soul in the description. You can follow us on Twitter at Girls Lunch. Nicole is also on Twitter at NicoleH262, and her website is NicoleHilton.com. Julia is smarter than all of us and not on social media. Thank you for listening. We do need to do like a clap. I need something that makes a loud noise.
All I've got... Oh, wait.
Do you have a clicker?
No, I have an ocarina.
Oh.
This will make a loud noise.